All right, thanks very much. This year I'm going to go through the 6th Annual Infrastructure Security Report. This is a worldwide report that effectively his goal is to respond to your views and your information that you provided to us, to our survey questions. And hopefully you have some trending and analysis that's relevant to your day-to-day operations and focus. Throughout the report, I'll try to jump into as many key findings and trends from previous years that we've observed. This year, basically the time period that we did the survey was Q4 of 2009 through the end of Q3 2010. They had about 111 total respondents. That was down a little bit from the previous year, 2009. We had about 132 respondents. However, the last 2 years has provided roughly a doubling of the number of folks who have given us responses. Previous years were in the 60 to 70 ranges, and now we're in the somewhere between 110, 111 this year to 132 last year. So hopefully those can continue to go up. If you have interest in the data that we present, please see me and provide some information about your current role, and if it fits the profile we're looking for, we'd like to include you in the survey as well. So this year's report has some somewhat new distribution of folks responding. Just about everybody provided some information that they were a service provider of one type or another. 70% of the respondents provide some type of direct internet access. Just over 60% provides hosting, CDN, and content delivery services. 43% provide a managed security service. 35% of respondents this year also provide mobile services, either in mobile or fixed wireline, fixed wireless services. Some more demographics, a reasonably good distribution of folks from around the world. The one shift downward this year was North American providers went down from about 42% last year to 28% this year. But we did have good increases in some of the emerging markets in APAC and in Latin America specifically. Africa is still relatively underreported, unfortunately. All the respondents, and this is key to the survey, all the respondents see that security is core to their function on a day-to-day basis. It's core to their day-to-day job. It's core of their focus. Everyone either has identified themselves as a network engineer or a security engineer. Others identified themselves as either a security architect, a researcher, or an analyst. One respondent identified himself this year rather notably as an e-crime manager. So, key findings. The attack surface continues to shift. This year we saw rather interestingly and unfortunately a redoubling of total volumetric traffic observed in a single coordinated sustained attack. I'll jump into a little bit more of that in just a moment. Unfortunately, last year we saw what we thought was a leveling out. We went from 40 gigabits to 49 gigabits, and this year we have a much more significant increase of that. So I'll jump into that in a moment. The vast majority of application attacks continue to target critical infrastructure for service delivery. Things like HTTP and DNS services are primarily focused of attacks. Mail infrastructure is also another focus of attack that's increasing in frequency. Some of the more sophisticated applications are also now increasing in attacks. HTTP and VoIP as well as DNS services are also increasing targets of attacks. Stateful systems placed in the packet core have been reported as critical points of failure, and majority of respondents seeing failures in the network have reported those systems being most leveraged for resource exhaustion. Operators are working really, really hard to roll out advanced services. Significant concern focused around the rollout of DNSSec, both operationally as well as from a security availability standpoint. And the concern has really been focused around resolver availability of the network layer. Also, folks are working hard to roll out V6. Visibility is a primary concern within the V6 networks. Infections and tunneling traffic of nefarious activities is also a concern and the reason for the focus in the V6 area. Mobile networks are experiencing a complete explosion, not surprisingly at all. They're experiencing explosion in both their operational challenges, their user growth, and the data growth on their networks. Their typical responses look a lot like the original survey responses for our fixed wireline surveys and the original surveys of 2005, 2006. Despite some of the mobile operators not really seeing themselves as an ISP, they're certainly inadvertently operating as such. And they're struggling to keep pace with the operational requirements needed to deliver those services. So some of the security events in 2010 and then the outlook of 2011, the goal here is to provide some information as to how well we did, how well you did with your predictions of what 2010 was going to look like. So we asked what the top operational concerns of the year were, and this year's response fell effectively in line with what the survey's prediction of 2009 were. Almost 70% observed attacks against customer infrastructure. Nearly 60% observed attacks against, nearly 60% of the group observed botted systems on the network. Infrastructure complexity is reflected in the number of reported outages due to misconfiguration. 30% of the report is seeing zero-day and new vulnerabilities contributing to security events, and somewhat surprisingly, almost 20% have experienced outages due to an exhaustion of bandwidth on the network. The prediction now for 2011 from the group shows an increased concern over DDoS threats across the board, despite what targets or infrastructure they're most concerned about. Attacks towards service, customers, and network infrastructure is obviously the greatest concern. Optimistically, respondents predict a decrease in misconfiguration, and hopefully that proves out. Perhaps a little paradoxically, feedback predicts an increase in new application vulnerabilities, but a decrease in the compromised hosts found on the network. So drilling into that a little bit, we found that some clarity where new application vulnerability concerns are really focused in the V6 area and the V6 stack implementations of systems on the network. And the prediction of the decrease in compromised hosts is really focusing on the V4 side of the network, where people are feeling more comfortable and operational practices are more sound and tested. The volume of attacks over time has unfortunately got back to that doubling effect that I talked about in the key findings just a moment ago. This year we saw for the first time a sustained coordinated attack of 100 gigabits per second. That's a doubling of last year at 49 gigabits per second. Unfortunately, and in line with the predictions of the 2009 report, folks were most concerned then about an increase in volumetric attacks as well as the number of infected hosts on the system from botted activity, and these proved out in the volume that we did see. So this is effectively another doubling and back into that trend that we've seen over time. Application layer attacks increase, focusing on the most available services, HTTP and DNS primarily. The DNS attacks observed are primarily reflection amplification attacks. SMTP infrastructure is basically reported to see a lot of backscatter attacks as well as crafted and intentional Joe jobs. VoIP infrastructure has increased in prominence primarily through fraud and some type of disruption to normal operations. We're also seeing an increased number of HTTPS or SSL/TLS attacks towards those resources exhausting infrastructure. This is one of the more telling aspects of the report in how often folks are actually cycling in these events, whether these things are just rather infrequent or frequent type events. And surprisingly, compared to 2009, the frequency has increased significantly. So now more than 70% of respondents observe an attack at least once per month. 35% of the folks see 10 or more DDoS events per month. That's nearly a doubling of last year's data. 66% were classified as attacks towards customer infrastructure. And the remaining was either attacks towards operated service infrastructure or infrastructure itself. Drilling in on that a little bit more, focusing in on responses around the IDCs and those folks who do operate IDCs. There's been a wide range of frequency of attacks observed per month. 40% see fewer, somewhere between 0 and 10%, or 0 and 10 events per month, while an unlucky 13% see, and really an impressive number of between 100 and 500 attacks per month. Significant impact of these events were reported, including increased operational expense in over half the respondents' environments, followed by customer churn and revenue loss. And finally, there was some reporting of employee churn due to the pressure of that operational state. Kind of a sad response there. So some feedback about firewalls and stateful devices in the IDC. The majority of respondents reported that those systems have been the failure points of an infrastructure during a DDoS event. 38% did not experience any event like that, and 13% they said those systems weren't placed in the IDC in the fast path. DNSSec deployments, about 9% of the folks have said they've deployed DNSSec. An additional 15% have reported a partial deployment. Next largest group report that they plan on doing that probably when another set of TLDs are signed, as in the impending signing of the .com domain, currently ongoing. And those who have made some deployment of DNSSec, the majority have not experienced operational issues thus far. About a third of the group experienced or anticipate a greater impact of DNS reflection events, those already experienced today. And the remaining group, 2/3, have not experienced or don't expect to see an increase in the DNSSec pressure. This is somewhat different from our anecdotal observations, but rather optimistic, and hopefully that continues. On V4 exhaustion, we got some responses like, duh, come on, this is happening. Other folks certainly feel comfortable in the allocations that they currently hold, while about 44% of the folks say that they're going to run out of space this year and don't expect to get any new allocations, obviously. The number of predicted impacts of the exhaustion are listed, but these are likely nothing new to the group. This has been well documented, and clearly a lot of work is being moved towards V6 rollout. On V6 specifically, 64% of the group has done some type of deployment. 80% expect to do some type of deployment this year. Despite that, there's very little traffic that folks have observed as peak traffic on the network today in the V6 network, only 500 megabits at peak. And obviously exponential growth is expected. Whether that actually occurs or not, hopefully our next survey will capture that and provide a reflection back. There was a real angst in the security posture in V6 networks reported by the group. On the V6 side, we're happy to report that so the V6 side, most of the folks are really focusing on trying to roll out some type of visibility capability. To that end, 41% of the folks feel NetFlow capabilities are on par with their V4 infrastructure today. Nearly the same number indicate that there was an incomplete parity in existing infrastructure. About 20% indicated that new infrastructure deployments were required in the following year to provide parity on v6 visibility or net flow capabilities in their infrastructure. And the next biggest concern was just an operational comfort with v6 networks and v6 technologies. Greatest concerns were basically feature parity, stack implementation flaws, and traffic floods from DDoS events. In the use of best current practices, the vast majority of folks responding said they are using best practices. They have them in place and have good operational confidence in their use today. Most folks are using best practices in some coordinated effort, layering one best practice of security upon another. Perhaps somewhat of a telling underlying factor of the concerns about DDoS being the threat and future threat as well is very few of the respondents indicated simulating any testing of their DDoS response or response teams on a regular basis. And in our experience, the most effective incident response teams, those that have been able to measurably reduce event impact and outage durations, have practiced techniques and procedures and event simulations. In all cases where folks have been practicing event simulations, they've been able to reduce their time to response and reduce their outages times during the drills. One organization provided kind of an anecdotal feedback that they had an event occurred during one of their simulations, and they had to switch over from simulation to reality immediately, and they still were able to reduce lost cycles and reduce operational impact. So good practice there, something of an emerging best practice in operational teams, and something that's certainly providing effectiveness in the networks today. Tools being used to protect from the DDoS threat. Another bright point, really, 96% of the group feels that they have some means of detecting an event on their network. NetFlow and SMP-based tools are the primary tools being used, both commercially and open source tools. Only 4% of the group thought that they had no real capability of detecting an event today, which is really pretty pervasive and pretty good. About 72% of the group thought that they had a good method for mitigating the threats. ACLs continue to be the number one capability or number one tool used in mitigating DDoS events. Equal portions of the group provided feedback that they're either using an intelligent DDoS mitigation system or destination-based blackholing techniques. This is a pretty significant increase from previous years where intelligent mitigation devices or black holes are increased from somewhere between 18% last year to almost 37% this year. So certainly a big uptick in that. On the OPSEC community participation, everyone had a good, the vast majority of folks had a very good view of these organizations, these groups. They all thought to be relatively effective. Most respondents were not actively participating in the groups due to either some voiced frustration level with the size of their security team, the budgets allocated, or their ability to reach and be proactively involved in the organizations themselves. Lower participation is mainly due to the resources that teams feel like they lack. And even though this presentation doesn't highlight it directly, in the report there's a fair amount of analysis around the size of teams, what their budgets are, if those trends of budgets are growing or decreasing or remaining flat. Mostly folks have said that their budgets have remained flat. Group sizes have not increased necessarily, and yet they're definitely dealing with an increased number of threats and events on a day-to-day basis. A smaller number of folks did voice some frustration in the vetting of the membership policies within the communities as blockers to participation, but for the most part, folks do view the OPSEC groups as effective. Similarly, I've really kind of flown through my data. Similarly, the confidence in law enforcement, about 60% of our survey respondents had not reported any events at all to law enforcement last year. That's about the same as previous years. The single biggest challenge, again, in reporting events to security authorities is the simple lack of confidence in the results such a report to the authorities would provide. A quarter of folks indicated that law enforcement is just unresponsive. About a fifth of the group have a corporate policy that prevents them from making an active response or an active report to authorities about an event. And the smallest group of respondents indicate that reporting anything to law enforcement is just not their problem. That aspect has actually decreased over the years, but still is a measurable response. About half the group have some confidence that law enforcement has the capabilities to deal with the event, but 2/3 believe that there's really no net improvement or there's a reduction in law enforcement capabilities to deal with events. Overall, it's about the same as previous years as well. In 2009, So that's an overview of the data this year. The report will be published on our website tomorrow. I'll respond to the mailing list with a URL for access to the full report. This year's report provides about 80 pages of additional data and graphs, as well as some of probably the more interesting and pithy pieces of feedback that were just captures of free-form feedback that folks have anecdotal information that's very interesting and pertinent to the items that we covered. Again, like I said in the beginning, if there's anyone who's interested in participating, if your job is focused on securing network infrastructure or dealing with events and incident responses, we'd be really interested in your feedback. You can come see me after the event or during the event, after the talk or during the event, and provide some information, and we'll glad you to the list. With that, thanks a lot.
Hi, Kathy Aronson, Cascadia Corporation. I was wondering, are there any, with V6, any new attack vectors or old ones that are showing up again because of implementation issues with V6 or anything like that?
Thanks for your question. We didn't see a real parsing out of attack events within the V6 network. Most of the responses were focused around the instrumentation effort in the V6 network itself, and then a prediction of what potential threats they may experience. So primarily the potential concerns were things about flaws of the stack implementation and operational readiness to deal with events on the V6 side. Yep.
Hello. Patrick Delmore, Akamai. You said you saw a 100 gig attack, or somebody saw a 100 gig attack. Do we know what that was against? HTTP, DNS, what?
It was a reflection attack against DNS.
Reflection attack against DNS?
I'm sorry, reflection attack leveraging DNS, excuse me.
Oh, okay. And the DNSSec, is anybody worried that it's going to cause a bigger problem because it makes your name servers more easy to take down because they have to calculate it, or is everybody pre-calculating their answers, or how does this work?
I don't think we parse that level of data. I think that certainly the primary concern was around the load of the resolver layer. That the resolver layer now has to effectively resolve two aspects, both the chain of authority as well as the resolved answer as well. Outside of that, I'm not sure if we have enough data to parse out an answer for you.
Thank you.
Yep. Yep.
Hi. You had a slide with the numbers on usage of BCPs in operator space. Do you expect these numbers to be roughly the same for the non-respondents to the survey, or do you think there's vast, say, differences between those operators who responded for whatever reason and those who did not?
That's a good question. So I guess I'm speculating now whether we're capturing a reasonable representation of the community's activities, and I would have to say that we are, only from the fact that we're gathering data from across geographic distributed organizations and organizations that do cover large swaths of the global geography. However, certainly these trends may be different in other vertical markets or other focused particular aspects of the markets that we may not be touching as much. We have focused on some service provider type markets. In the past we've seen kind of a growing group of others, which this year we tried to break out and figure out who is the other. And the biggest groups were DNS operators as well as mobile operators. So we did get some information further parsed out about who's responding. But actually, in order to speculate, I'm not exactly sure if we're really missing a large swath. Do you have a feeling that these are really skewed from typical operations?
Yeah, say my speculation is an operator who responds to the survey has, maybe to some degree some interest in security and is taking care of it as a whole, whereas there might be a large chunk of operators in maybe not, say, the US or Western Europe, but other parts of the world who don't take care of stuff like this and don't participate in the survey. So my expectation is the picture might be different there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for the feedback. Any other questions?
I was just going to sort of ask a follow-on on that, and if you had any idea of why you had such a low response rate from, I think it was Africa, but the emerging countries in general. It could be related to what you were just saying, that if you don't have mitigation infrastructure in place, you probably don't want to be advertising that. But I'm not sure.
Yeah, certainly there is a reluctance, or there is an observed reluctance from folks who have been victimized of attacks to report and provide further feedback about attacks. There certainly seems to be some frustration when an attack is effective, that reporting will bring more scrutiny on the policies and activities of the group rather than support and further education. Thanks for that.
Anyone else? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thanks.